The flowers were still in the vase when Meredith found the texts. Not wilted yet, that was the strange part. She'd bought them herself 3 days earlier. Yellow tulips from the market on Granville Street, and they stood perfectly upright on the kitchen counter while her entire marriage dissolved in her hands. Her phone had been dead. She'd borrowed Aaron's to call her mother, and there they were, not hidden, not even deleted. 47 messages from someone named Kay, with a heart beside the letter, going back 8 months. 8 months. Meredith set the phone down very carefully, the way you set down something fragile when you're not sure your hands are still working. Aaron was in the shower. She could hear the water running. She stood in their kitchen in their condo in Vancouver, surrounded by the furniture they'd picked out together. The coffee maker she'd given him for his birthday. The framed print from their trip to Tofino hanging crooked on the wall because neither of them had gotten around to fixing it, and she thought, I have been living in someone else's life. She didn't cry. That surprised her later. She thought she would, but instead something went very quiet inside her, the way it gets quiet before a storm rolls in off the Pacific. Still and gray and certain, Aaron came out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist, still damp, smiling at something on his own phone. He didn't notice her expression right away. He never did notice things unless they were right in front of him. Hey, he said, you want to grab dinner at Who is Kay? The smile went out, just like that, like a light switch. Meredith Calloway had spent 11 years building a life around Aaron Beckett. She'd met him when she was 26, at a fundraiser gala for the Vancouver Art Gallery where she worked as a junior curator. He was there with clients. He was in commercial real estate, always with clients, and he was handsome in the particular way that real estate agents in their early 30s are handsome. Confident jaw, good watch, suit that fits just right. He asked her about the painting behind her. She explained it for 15 minutes. He listened, or seemed to. They got married 4 years later at a vineyard. Her mother cried. His family flew in from Calgary. It was, by all accounts, a beautiful wedding. What came after was quieter than she'd expected. Not unhappy, she would have said then. Just quiet. Aaron worked long hours, traveled often, came home tired. Meredith threw herself into her work at the gallery, built a reputation, started getting invited to speak at panels about emerging Indigenous artists in the Pacific Northwest. She made her own name. She was proud of that. But she had also, without quite realizing it, organized her entire life around Aaron's schedule. Moved from the apartment she loved near Commercial Drive to his preferred neighborhood in Yaletown, because it was closer to his office. Turned down a 6-month residency in Montreal because it wasn't the right time for them. Hosted his clients' dinner parties on Friday nights instead of seeing her own friends, who slowly, gently drifted to the edges of her calendar. She told herself this was what marriage looked like up close. Compromise. Adjustment. Showing up. She did not tell herself the other thing. The thing she would only admit later, after everything, which was that she had been slowly disappearing into the shape of what Aaron needed her to be, and calling it love. His name was Kay Krista. Krista Huang, 29 years old, junior associate at the firm that handled Aaron's largest development deal. Meredith learned this not from Aaron, who said very little that was useful in the weeks that followed, but from her own careful, terrible research. She wasn't someone who fell apart. She was someone who gathered information and then decided what to do with it. What she discovered, piece by piece, was not an impulsive affair. It was a relationship, planned around her, scheduled into the gaps she left when she was at conference openings, work travel, evenings at the gallery. There were restaurant reservations, a weekend in Whistler the same weekend Meredith had attended an art fair in Toronto. Hotel receipts that surfaced later during the legal process, dated to months she thought she remembered as ordinary. She had been the logistics. Krista had been the plan. The night she found the texts, Aaron tried to explain. He stood in their kitchen with that towel still around his waist, and he talked about feeling disconnected, about pressure at work, about how things between them had gotten stale. His word, stale. As though their marriage was bread left on the counter. Meredith listened. She was good at listening. Then she said, very quietly, I want you to call your brother and ask if you can stay there tonight. He blinked. Meredith, tonight, she said, and then I'd like you to call a lawyer. Because I'm going to call mine in the morning. She meant it. That was the thing Aaron didn't understand yet. That she meant exactly what she said, every time she said it. The divorce proceedings began in the early months of a cold Vancouver winter. Gray rain hammering the windows of the mediator's downtown office on West Georgia Street. What Aaron did next would have shocked Meredith, if she'd had anything left to be shocked with. She had been the one with the steadier income in the early years of their marriage, her gallery salary, supplemented by consulting work and a modest inheritance from her grandmother, while Aaron was still building his client base. She had co-signed his first major development loan, had entertained his business connections, hosted the dinners, Played the role of the charming, cultured wife that made him look like a man worth investing in. She had documentation of all of it. She was meticulous, always had been. Aaron's lawyer came to the first session with a position that could charitably be described as audacious. The argument, essentially, was that Meredith's contributions to Aaron's business growth were immaterial, domestic in nature, uncountable, and that the significant financial assets accumulated during the marriage should reflect Aaron's professional efforts rather than a 50-50 split. Meredith's lawyer, a composed woman named Patricia Ossie who wore her natural hair in a high puff and had a handshake that meant business, set a binder on the table. Inside was 11 years of paper, co-signed documents, financial transfers, emails from Aaron's own clients thanking Meredith and Aaron for their hospitality, their introductions, their partnership. A spreadsheet, Meredith's own, tracking every event she had organized, every contact she had cultivated, every dinner she had hosted. She'd kept it compulsively, the way people with immigrant parents learn to document everything. Her grandmother had always said,
"Write it down.
The world does not remember what it owes you unless you remind it." The room got very quiet when Patricia slid the binder across the table. Aaron's lawyer asked for a recess. Outside on Georgia Street during the break, Meredith stood with a coffee she wasn't drinking and called her best friend. A woman named Susanna who'd known her since university, and who had, in the months since the separation, become the scaffolding that held Meredith upright on her worst days. "How's it going?" Susanna asked. "I think his lawyer just realized what they walked into." "Good." A pause. "Are you okay?" Meredith looked out at the street. A man was walking a golden retriever in the rain without an umbrella. The dog seemed unbothered. "I'm getting there," she said. "I'm actually getting there." She meant that too. The settlement came 3 months later. Fair by the standards of the province. Not everything she deserved perhaps, but enough. Enough to keep her in the city she's loved, to start over in a way that felt like a beginning rather than a consolation prize. What happened next, Aaron did not see coming. While he was focused on the legal process, Meredith had been quietly doing something else. She had been talking to people. In the art world, reputation travels like water. It finds every crack. And Meredith's reputation, her actual one, not the version that existed in Aaron's shadow, was excellent. She'd spent 11 years curating relationships with artists, collectors, donors, institutions. She had a name. She had credibility. She had a vision for something she'd been turning over in her mind for years. A small, independent gallery focused on contemporary indigenous and diaspora artists, filling a gap she'd watched the bigger institutions step around for a decade. She found a space in Mount Pleasant. She found investors, 2 of them in fact, were women she'd met at Aaron's dinner parties, who had liked Meredith rather more than they'd liked Aaron. She brought in a young Nisga'a artist named Raymond, whose work had been sitting in storage because no gallery had been willing to take the commercial risk. The opening was in April. The line went around the block. She had not thought about what Aaron would do when he found out. She probably should have. 11 years is a long time to learn someone's patterns, but she'd been so focused on building forward that she hadn't looked back. Aaron found out about the gallery through a mutual acquaintance, sometime in the second week after the opening, when reviews started appearing in local arts coverage and Meredith's name was in print in places it had never been before. He called her. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. She listened to the message, standing in the gallery after closing, surrounded by Raymond's paintings, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Pity, not the painful kind, the clear-eyed kind. The kind that arrives when you've finally gotten enough distance to see something for what it actually is. What Aaron said in the voicemail was this. He was proud of her. He always knew she could do it. He'd been thinking about them, about the mistakes he'd made, about how Krista hadn't worked out. The relationship had ended shortly after the divorce was finalized, a fact Meredith had learned the same way she'd learned everything about that situation. Through careful, dispassionate research, and about how he wondered sometimes if they'd given up too quickly. Meredith deleted the message and went back to hanging the next show. It was Susanna who first mentioned Daniel Ossie, not Patricia's son, different family, different story entirely, but Daniel Ossie, a Vancouver-based architect she knew through her partner's firm, who had recently moved back to the city after 5 years in Toronto. Susanna mentioned him the way she mentioned all things she thought Meredith should pay attention to, casually, with a very specific kind of sideways look. "He's coming to the fundraiser next month," she said. "The one at the gallery." "Susanna, I'm just giving you information. You're giving me information the same way you gave me information about the tax accountant and the rowing coach. And both of those were perfectly nice. The rowing coach brought his ex-wife to our coffee." Susanna conceded this with a wave. "Daniel is different. He actually listens when people talk. You'll know what I mean when you meet him." Meredith met him at the fundraiser on a Thursday evening in early June, when Vancouver is at its most persuasive, the mountains clear after weeks of rain, the light doing what it does at that hour, golden and stubborn. He was standing in front of one of Raymond's larger pieces, a triptych in ochre and deep blue, and he was actually looking at it, not glancing, not performing interest for someone nearby. Looking, she introduced herself as the gallery director. He extended his hand and said, "I know who you are. I read the review in the Globe. The line about indigenous art being a corrective to our collective amnesia. That was yours?" "It was? It's exactly right." He looked back at the painting. "He's extraordinary." She stayed beside him for the rest of the evening. She did not rush anything. She was 38 years old and she had learned, in the hardest way, what it cost to move too fast in the direction of someone else's life. But Daniel was patient in a way she hadn't expected someone to be patient. He showed up to the gallery's next opening. He texted when she mentioned she was having a hard week. Not to fix it but just to say he was thinking of her. He took her to a Japanese restaurant in Strathcona that she'd never been to, where the chef knew his name and brought out dishes without being asked. And over dinner he talked about his work. A community center he was designing for a neighborhood in East Van. The arguments he'd had with the developers about keeping the courtyard open to the public. With the kind of quiet conviction that reminded Meredith of why she'd gotten into her own work in the first place. He had never been married. He'd been engaged once, years ago, ended things when he realized they were building toward a life that looked right from the outside but felt hollow. "I'd rather be alone than wrong," he said. He said it without drama, as a fact. Meredith understood exactly what he meant. By October they were spending most weekends together. By November she had introduced him to Susanna, which was, in their friendship's language, a significant gesture. Susanna texted her immediately after, "Okay, I take full credit." Aaron found out about Daniel the way people tend to find out about things they were hoping not to know, through someone at a party who assumed he already knew. He did not take it calmly. What followed was a series of communications, calls, texts, one handwritten note that arrived at the gallery, which Meredith read once and then handed to Patricia with a raised eyebrow, that revealed, more clearly than anything during the marriage itself, exactly who Aaron Beckett was under pressure. He was not violent. She wants to be clear about that in the telling. He was something else. He was entitled in the precise meaning of that word. He had organized his understanding of Meredith around a version of her that existed to reflect his life back to him. And now she had gone and become something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with him, and he could not locate himself in that story. He told her she was moving too fast. He told her Daniel was taking advantage of her vulnerability. He told her that what they'd had was real and worth fighting for. He said all of this, repeatedly, with the conviction of someone who had never once examined his own behavior and found it wanting. Meredith did not respond to the note. She did not respond to the texts. She had her lawyer send one brief letter advising him to direct all future communications through proper channels. And then she went back to work. The following spring, the gallery was nominated for a Community Arts Award given by the city's Cultural Foundation. The ceremony was held at a hotel in downtown Vancouver, one of the old ones on the waterfront, the kind with a ballroom that still had the original chandelier. Meredith wore a dress the color of deep water and arrived with Daniel, who had spent the day in a design review meeting and still looked, somehow, exactly right. She did not know Aaron would be there. He was at a table near the back with clients, in his element, the charming man at the party with the good watch and the fitting suit. She noticed him first. He noticed her a moment later, and what crossed his face in that instant, she saw it clearly from across the room, was not anger anymore. It was something more complicated than anger. It was the specific expression of someone who has finally, too late, understood what they had. He came over during the cocktail hour. She had known he would. "You look incredible," he said. "Thank you." She said it the way you accept a compliment from a stranger, graciously, neutrally, not taking it home with you. "Is that?" He looked at Daniel's hand at the small of her back. "Is that serious?" Meredith thought about the question. About all the years she'd spent making herself smaller to fit into the shape of Aaron's life. About the gallery full of work she believed in. About Daniel in the courtyard of his East Van Community Center, arguing cheerfully with developers about whether 12 extra parking spaces were worth sacrificing a garden. "Yes," she said, "it is." Aaron nodded. He looked like he was going to say something more. Something about second chances, about timing, about all the things people say when they've already spent the goodwill they were given. But he didn't. Maybe he read her face. Maybe he finally understood that there was no version of this conversation that ended the way he wanted it to. He nodded again, said something polite, and went back to his table. Meredith won the award. She stood at the podium with the plaque in her hands and thanked her artists, her donors, her board, and Susanna, who whooped from the third table in a way that was thoroughly undignified and exactly right. She thanked her grandmother for teaching her to write things down. She did not look at Aaron's table. She did not need to. What she thought about later, driving home with Daniel through the nighttime city, the bridges lit up over the Fraser, the radio playing something low and unhurried, was not Aaron at all. She thought about the woman who had stood in that kitchen 3 years ago with yellow tulips on the counter, watching her marriage dissolve in her hands, and going so quiet inside. She understood that woman. She was not ashamed of her. That woman had also held herself together, called her lawyer in the morning, documented everything and showed up. Sometimes the most important thing you do is show up, even when the floor has disappeared beneath you, even when you don't know yet what you're showing up for. She rolled the window down. The night air came in off the water, cold and clean the way Vancouver air is clean in April, and she thought, this is mine, all of this. Daniel reached over and took her hand without saying anything. She held on.